Imagine a city of 50,000 souls. It is the 14th century. The winter is approaching, cold and unforgiving. The grain silos are only half full. The herds of cattle are thin. How does a medieval metropolis survive the freezing, barren months when the earth yields absolutely nothing? The answer does not lie in the soil. It lies in the dark, churning waters of the North Sea. But catching enough fish to feed tens of thousands of people requires an infrastructure so massive, so complex, and so labor-intensive that it rivals the construction of a stone cathedral. We look back at history, and we see knights, kings, and castles. We are blind to the true engines of human survival. We cannot see the 18 miles of handcrafted cord, woven knot by agonizing knot, by the calloused hands of an entire coastal village. Today we rebuild the invisible leviathan of the medieval economy. We are going to make a medieval gillnet, and it begins with a tiny, unremarkable seed. If you are fascinated by the lost arts of human survival and the forgotten crafts that built our world, do not forget to subscribe to Before the Machine. We resurrect the forgotten sweat and blood of history, one artifact at a time. The scale of medieval fishing is something the modern mind struggles to comprehend. We are not talking about a solitary angler with a wooden rod and a linen line sitting peacefully by a quiet stream. We are talking about industrial-scale extraction, performed entirely without the aid of fossil fuels, synthetic polymers, or automated factories. The target is the Atlantic herring, a fish that travels in shoals so dense they turn the ocean silver. To capture them in quantities large enough to sustain cities like London, Bruges, or Yarmouth, fishermen needed nets of monstrous proportions. A single drift net could measure 100 feet in length and 30 feet in depth. A fishing vessel would deploy dozens of these nets, tied together to form a wall of death, stretching for over a mile across the ocean current. To construct just one fleet of nets, the community required miles upon miles of cordage. The material had to be incredibly strong, resistant to the corrosive bite of salt water, and invisible to the fish in the murky depths. The answer was hemp, Cannabis sativa, a plant that would define the maritime supremacy of Europe for centuries. Our journey begins not at the edge of the sea, but inland, in the fertile, well-drained soils of an agricultural estate. It is early spring. The frost has finally retreated, leaving the earth soft and receptive. The medieval farmer must prepare the hemp field, a plot of land known as a hempland. This soil requires heavy manuring. The laborers bring carts filled with animal dung, spreading it thick over the field. They plow the earth deep, turning the dark loam over and over until it is loose and rich. Hemp is a demanding master. It consumes the nutrients of the earth with a ravenous appetite. The sower walks across the prepared field. He carries a canvas bag filled with thousands of hard, round hemp seeds. He casts them by hand, using a sweeping motion, broadcasting the seeds thick and fast. They must be planted densely. If hemp is given too much space, it grows wide and branching, producing a coarse, woody stem. But if the seeds are crowded together, the plants are forced to compete for the sunlight. They will shoot straight up toward the sky, growing tall, slender, and unbranched. This is the secret to producing the long, fine bast fibers required for high-quality netting twine. For 3 months, the hempland transforms into a dense, impenetrable jungle of green. The stalks reach 10 feet into the air. The leaves block out the sun entirely, creating a humid, shadowed microclimate at the base of the stalks that smothers any competing weeds. The farmer watches the crop closely. He is waiting for a very specific moment in the late summer. He must harvest the male plants just after they release their golden pollen, but before the female plants go to seed. The male plants provide the finest, strongest fiber, perfectly suited for the intricate knots of a fishing net. The harvest is a brutal, backbreaking endeavor. The hemp stalks cannot be cut with a scythe or a sickle. Cutting the stalks would leave the precious fibers at the base of the plant in the ground, wasting a crucial portion of the yield. Furthermore, the sharp edge of a blade would sever the continuous length of the outer fibers. Instead, the laborers must uproot every single stalk by hand. Men and women line up at the edge of the dense green wall. They bend their backs, grasp the rough stems low to the dirt, and pull with all their might. The roots tear free from the soil with a dull, snapping sound. Their hands are quickly stained green, blistered by the rough texture of the mature stalks. They gather the harvested hemp into bundles, tying them tightly with a few green stems. The bundles are left standing in the field, propped against each other in conical shocks, allowing the sun and the wind to dry the leaves and the residual moisture. But drying is only the first trial. The true magic of fiber extraction requires a process of controlled decay. This is called retting. The hemp stalk consists of a woody inner core known as the hurd, surrounded by the long, stringy bast fibers. These fibers are glued to the woody core by natural pectins and plant gums. To separate the strong fiber from the brittle wood, the glue must be destroyed. The villagers transport the dried bundles to a specially dug pit filled with stagnant water, or a slow-moving backwater of a river. This is the retting pond. They submerge the heavy bundles into the dark water, weighing them down with large stones and heavy logs. They must be completely submerged, deprived of oxygen. Now the microscopic world takes over. Anaerobic bacteria multiply in the warm, stagnant water. They begin to feast upon the pectins and sugars inside the hemp stalks. As the bacteria gorge themselves, they excrete acids and gases. The water turns a foul, murky brown. Bubbles of methane and hydrogen sulfide rise to the surface, bursting with an unbearable stench. The smell of a retting pond is legendary, a mixture of rotting cabbage, sulfur, and decay. It is a smell that clings to the skin, to the hair, to the very clothes of the workers. In many medieval towns, laws are passed forbidding the retting of hemp near the center of the village, forcing the operation out into the isolated marshes. The master of the hemp must monitor the pond every single day. The timing is a matter of profound intuition. If he pulls the bundles out too early, the pectins will not be fully dissolved, and the fibers will remain stubbornly glued to the woody core, impossible to separate. If he leaves them in the water for a day too long, the ravenous bacteria will turn their attention from the glue to the fibers themselves, eating away the strength of the hemp and turning the entire harvest into a useless, rotting mush. He wades into the foul water, pulling a single stalk from the submerged bundles. He snaps it between his fingers. He watches how the fiber peels away from the inner wood. When it slips off like a loose sleeve, the retting is perfectly complete. The workers rush into the water, dragging the heavy, waterlogged, stinking bundles up onto the grassy banks. The bundles are untied and spread out thinly over the grass. The sun and the wind must now bake the stalks completely dry. As the moisture evaporates, the woody core becomes incredibly brittle, while the outer fibers retain their legendary tensile strength. The dried hemp is brought into the village, into the dusty barns, where the physical violence of processing begins. The laborers must shatter the brittle inner wood without cutting the outer fibers. They use a wooden tool called a hemp brake. It looks like a heavy wooden jaw, composed of wooden slats that interlock. The worker takes a handful of the dried stalks and lays them across the bottom teeth of the brake. With a heavy, rhythmic motion, he brings the top jaw down. Crack! The brittle, woody core shatters into dozens of sharp shards. He pulls the handful forward and strikes again. Crack! Slowly, the stiff stalks are transformed into a chaotic tangle of long green fibers mixed with small broken pieces of wood, which fall to the floor like wooden snow. But the fiber is not yet clean. It must be scutched. The worker drapes the broken handful of hemp over a vertical wooden board. He takes a scutching knife, a large flat wooden paddle with a tapered edge. He strikes the hanging fibers repeatedly, sweeping the blade down the length of the hemp. The dull wooden edge scrapes away the remaining fragments of the woody hurd, beating the fibers until they are relatively clean. The air in the barn is thick with dust. The workers breathe in the fine particles of dried plant matter, coughing as they swing the heavy wooden blades. The final stage of preparation is the hackling. This is the combing of the hemp. The hackle is a terrifying tool, a heavy block of wood set with rows of long, sharp iron spikes. The worker takes the scutched hemp and violently whips it down onto the iron teeth. He pulls the tangled mass through the spikes. The hackle rips through the fibers, separating the long, continuous strands from the short, tangled and broken ones. He repeats this process over and over, moving to hackles with increasingly finer and closer iron teeth. With every pull, the coarse, rough hemp is refined. The short, messy fibers, known as tow, are left behind in the teeth of the comb. These will not be wasted. They will be used to make cheap rope, coarse sacking or oakum for caulking the seams of wooden ships. What remains in the worker's hand is the line hemp. It is a beautiful, shimmering cascade of long, pale green, incredibly strong fibers. It looks almost like the hair of a horse. It is soft to the touch, yet it possesses a tensile strength that can hold a struggling fish or anchor a ship against a storm. The raw material is finally ready. It is time to create the cord. To catch a fish, you need a net. To make a net, you need twine. But a net designed to stretch for a mile across the ocean cannot be made of thick, clumsy rope. It requires a twine that is remarkably thin, so that it remains invisible in the water, yet astonishingly strong, capable of withstanding the thrashing of 1,000 desperate fish. The spinning of the twine is a task that consumes the entire village. It is primarily the work of women, a continuous, unrelenting chore that fills every waking moment not spent farming or cooking. They spin while walking to the well. They spin while watching the children. They spin by the dim light of tallow candles deep into the cold night. They use a tool of ancient simplicity, the drop spindle. The spinner takes a handful of the combed line hemp and wraps it loosely around a distaff, a wooden staff tucked under her arm or into her belt. She pulls a small wisp of fiber from the distaff, twists it slightly with her fingers, and attaches it to the hook of the wooden spindle. She gives the spindle a sharp twirl and lets it drop toward the floor. As the spindle falls, gravity pulls it downward, while its rotation twists the loose fibers together. The magic of spinning relies on friction. The individual, overlapping hemp fibers are locked together by the aggressive twist, transforming a weak, pullable clump of hair into a continuous, unbreakable thread. The spinner expertly feeds more fiber from the distaff into the twisting yarn, controlling the thickness of the thread entirely by the sensitivity of her calloused fingertips. When the spindle reaches the floor, she stops, winds the newly spun yarn around the shaft of the spindle, hitches it back to the hook, and repeats the process. For a massive fishing fleet, a single strand of yarn is not strong enough. The nets require a ply. The women take 2 or 3 single strands of the spun hemp and twist them together in the opposite direction. This opposing twist locks the strands in place, preventing the twine from unraveling and exponentially increasing its strength. Miles and miles of this thin, robust hemp twine must be spun. It is an ocean of labor, an investment of human time that defies modern comprehension. Every single inch of the 18 miles of cordage required for the town's nets passes through the fingers of a human being, twisted by human muscle, smoothed by human sweat. The sheer scale of medieval craftsmanship is a testament to human endurance. If you are captivated by the staggering labor of our ancestors, strike that like button and share this video. Your support allows us to keep resurrecting these forgotten monuments of human effort. With the spools of hemp twine finally prepared, the actual creation of the net begins. This is the domain of the net braider, a craftsman of supreme patience and geometric precision. He does not use a loom. He does not use a machine. He uses only his hands and 2 small tools carved from hardwood. The first tool is the netting needle or shuttle. It is a flat, elongated piece of polished wood, typically carved from ash or fruitwood. It has a closed eye at one end and a deep open prong at the other. The braider winds the precious hemp twine tightly around the needle, loading it with as much cord as it can carry without becoming too bulky to pass through a small loop. The second tool is the mesh pin, also known as a lace or a gauge. This is simply a smooth, flat rectangle of wood. The width of this gauge strictly dictates the size of the holes in the finished net. This is a matter of critical importance. If the gauge is too wide, the target fish, the herring, will simply swim straight through the holes and escape. If the gauge is too narrow, the net will act like a solid wall in the water, catching every piece of floating debris, becoming impossibly heavy to drag, and catching juvenile fish, which would destroy the future of the fishery. The gauge must be perfectly calibrated to the girth of an adult herring. The braider begins by tying a foundation loop to a heavy wooden post or an iron hook on the wall of his cottage. He takes the wooden gauge in his left hand and the loaded needle in his right. He brings the twine down over the front of the gauge, creating a loop. He passes the needle up through the previous row of loops, pulls the twine tight against the edge of the wooden gauge, and then executes a rapid, complex knot. He does not tie a simple overhand knot. A simple knot would slip and slide along the twine when placed under the immense tension of a struggling catch, distorting the square meshes and ruining the net. Instead, he ties a sheet bend or a specialized braider's knot. He throws a loop of twine over his own thumb, passes the needle behind the two legs of the mesh above, brings it down through the loop on his thumb, and pulls with a sharp, definitive snap. The knot locks tight. It will never slip. It will only grow tighter the harder it is pulled. He slides the gauge to the right, brings the twine down again, passes the needle through the next loop, and snaps another knot. Over and over. Thousands of times, tens of thousands of times. The rhythmic clicking of the wooden needle against the wooden gauge becomes the heartbeat of the coastal village during the winter months. It is a hypnotic, relentless process. A skilled braider can tie a knot every second, his hands moving in a blur of practiced muscle memory. But the sheer surface area of a drift net is staggering. A single net requires perhaps 50,000 individual knots, and a ship requires dozens of these nets. The braider sits for hours, his back aching, his fingers raw from the friction of the rough hemp twine, building a flexible wall of empty space, mathematically designed to trap the gills of a silver fish in the dark ocean. When the braiding is finally complete, the nets are laid out on the grass. They are a pristine pale green color. They look beautiful, but they are fatally vulnerable. Hemp is a natural fiber. If left untreated and submerged in the biologically active soup of the North Sea, the hemp cordage will rot away into useless slime within a matter of weeks. The bacteria and fungi of the ocean will devour the hard-won labor of the entire village. To survive the sea, the net must be armored. It must be tanned. The village maintains large iron cauldrons or massive wooden vats, often located near the harbor. The craftsmen light roaring fires beneath the cauldrons, boiling hundreds of gallons of water. Into this boiling water, they throw the secret ingredient of medieval preservation, the bark of the oak tree, and sometimes the bark of the alder. Oak bark is incredibly rich in tannins, powerful astringent compounds that protect the living tree from insects and fungal decay. When boiled in water, the bark releases these dark, bitter chemicals, turning the liquid into a thick, steaming, dark brown liquor. The fishermen gather the massive folded sections of the new nets and plunge them into the boiling vat of oak extract. The hot water opens the fibers of the hemp twine, allowing the dark tannins to penetrate deep into the core of every single twisted thread. The nets are left to steep in this bubbling cauldron, absorbing the protective chemicals. When they are finally hauled out of the vat using long wooden poles, the nets have been completely transformed. They are no longer pale green. They are a deep, dark, reddish-brown, the color of dried blood and rich earth. This tanning process serves two absolutely critical purposes. First, the tannins chemically bond with the cellulose of the hemp, creating an environment highly toxic to the microscopic organisms that cause rot. An oak-tanned net can survive season after season in the corrosive saltwater without losing its strength. Second, the dark brown color is an optical camouflage. A pale net would reflect the faint light of the moon or the bioluminescence of the ocean, warning the shoals of herring to swim away. A dark brown net becomes a wall of shadow, invisible in the murky depths of the North Sea. The fish do not see the trap until they swim headlong into it, until the rigid twine slips behind their gill covers, trapping them forever. In some regions, an alternative method of preservation is used. The nets are completely saturated in a boiling mixture of raw linseed oil and dark pine tar. This thick, sticky concoction coats the hemp fibers in a waterproof barrier, preventing the water from ever reaching the cellulose. The pine tar gives the nets a distinct, sharp, smoky odor that permeates the entire fishing district, a smell that will forever be associated with the harvest of the sea. A net alone, even tanned and perfectly knotted, is useless. If thrown into the ocean, it will simply crumple into a tangled heap, drifting aimlessly with the tide. To function as a wall of death, the net needs structure. It needs to stand upright in the water column. This requires the application of opposing forces, buoyancy at the top and gravity at the bottom. The top edge of the net, known as the head rope, must be fitted with floats. In the medieval period, these floats are not made of bright plastic or extruded foam. They are harvested from the forest. The fishermen carve thick pieces of lightweight wood, often poplar or willow, shaping them into cylindrical buoys. Alternatively, they strip large, thick slabs of bark from specific trees, using the naturally buoyant, cork-like material to hold the heavy hemp rope near the surface. These wooden floats are drilled with a hot iron auger and securely bound to the head rope using thick, tarred twine. The bottom edge of the net, the foot rope, requires the opposite treatment. It must drag the bottom of the net down into the depths, pulling the meshes taut and opening the geometric traps. The fishermen use lead, a heavy, malleable metal that is easily acquired and worked. They cast small, thick rings of lead, or simply take strips of lead sheet and hammer them tightly around the thick hemp foot rope. Where lead is scarce or too expensive, they use the earth itself. They gather smooth, heavy river stones, carefully drilling a hole through the center of each stone and tying them to the foot rope. Or they take raw clay, molding it into thick rings and firing them in a hot kiln until they turn into heavy, indestructible ceramic sinkers. The addition of the wooden floats and the heavy lead or stone sinkers adds tremendous weight to the overall assembly. A single fleet of nets, once fully rigged, is a monster that requires the coordinated strength of an entire crew of hardened men just to lift it onto the deck of the wooden fishing vessel. The final step is the rigging. The massive sections of knotted mesh cannot bear the strain of hauling thousands of pounds of fish on their own. The fine twine would snap under the tension. The net must be framed by heavy ropes. The rope makers of the village have been busy twisting thick, heavy hawsers of the lowest grade hemp, the coarse tow that was left behind in the hackling combs. These thick ropes are boiled in pine tar until they are black, stiff, and completely impervious to water. The braider takes his wooden needle one last time. He sews the delicate diamond-shaped meshes of the fine net to the thick, brutal strength of the tarred head rope and foot rope. He must distribute the tension perfectly. If he sews the net too tight, it will tear when the rope stretches. If he sews it too loose, the net will bag and tangle in the current. When the net is finally hauled back aboard the ship, the true value of this incredible labor is revealed. The ropes groan under the immense weight. The men strain, their muscles burning, their hands bleeding from the friction of the tarred hemp. As the dark brown mesh breaks the surface of the water, it is no longer empty. It is alive with a frantic, shimmering energy. Thousands upon thousands of silver herring are trapped in the geometric grid. They have swum blindly into the invisible wall, forcing their heads through the perfect squares of the gauge. When they realized their mistake and tried to back out, the thin, unbreakable hemp twine slipped beneath their hard gill covers, locking them in place. They are gilled. This is the harvest. This is the reason for the manuring of the soil, the rotting in the stinking ponds, the shattering of the stalks, the endless spinning in the dark, and the millions of hand-tied knots. The fish are stripped from the nets, falling onto the wooden deck in a silver avalanche. They will be gutted, heavily salted, and packed tightly into oak barrels. These barrels of salted herring will be loaded onto carts and ships distributed across the continent, traded for iron, timber, and wine. They will feed the armies of kings. They will sustain the monks in their isolated abbeys. They will keep the peasants of the crowded cities alive through the darkest, coldest days of the winter famine. The medieval fishing net is not a simple tool. It is an infrastructure of survival. It represents an investment of human time and physical suffering that is almost unimaginable today. We look at the ocean now and see an empty expanse harvested by massive steel machines and synthetic polymers manufactured in distant factories. But before the machine, the sea was conquered by the hands of the people. Every single knot, every single fiber, every single drop of tar was applied by a human being fighting for survival. The 18 miles of cord that fed the city was a testament to the stubborn, relentless ingenuity of our ancestors. It was a masterpiece of patience, woven from the dirt of the earth to capture the life of the sea. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the forgotten infrastructure of the past. If you want to see more monumental tasks of ancient survival brought back to life, subscribe to Before the Machine. Leave a comment below telling us what ancient technology you want us to resurrect next. Until then, remember, everything we have was built by hand.